It's 3:33 a.m. You wake without reason, no alarm, no sound. Just the sudden, electric awareness that something is watching you watch the darkness. You reach for your phone, not because you want to, but because something in you knows to look. The screen glows, a notification, a video, this video, and the number of views stops you cold, 11,111. Or maybe it's the timestamp, 3:33, or the fact that yesterday, at exactly this time, you saw those same numbers on a license plate, a receipt, a random digital clock in a store window you'd never noticed before. You tell yourself it's coincidence, but your body knows better. There's a frequency humming beneath your ribs, a recognition so old it predates language. You've been here before, not in this moment, but in this feeling. The feeling of being summoned. Let me ask you something, and I want you to answer honestly, even if only to yourself. What if you didn't find this video? What if this video found you? What if the algorithm that served this to you wasn't random at all, but a mirror of your own observation collapsing probability into form? What if every click, every pause, every moment of attention you've given to the mystery of reality has been building a frequency signature, and this message is the response? You see, there's something happening right now that most people will never notice. A shift, a quantum gateway opening not in some distant cosmic event, but in the space between your thoughts. Between the moment you wonder if reality is responding to you and the moment you look away, dismissing it as imagination. That space, that razor-thin pause, is where everything changes. This isn't a video about manifesting a car or a relationship. This isn't another rehash of positive thinking or vision boards. This is about something far older, far stranger, and far more immediate. This is about the fact that you, yes, you, the one watching this right now, are not living in reality. You are creating it, frame by frame, breath by breath, observation by observation. And the universe has been trying to tell you this for years. The repeating numbers? Not coincidence. The dreams that feel more real than waking life? Not imagination. The sudden knowing that you should call someone seconds before they text you? Not luck. These are breadcrumbs. Signals from the field of probability showing you that the wall between observer and observed is thinner than you were taught to believe. But here's what they didn't tell you in school, in church, in any institution designed to make you believe you're small. The observer effect isn't just a quirk of quantum physics. It's the fundamental operating system of reality itself. And you are not a passive witness to existence. You are the variable that collapses the wave. You are the consciousness that turns infinite possibility into singular experience. The ancient mystery schools knew this. They called it different names across different lands. The Book of Thoth in Khem, the Akashic Field in the East, the Philosopher's Stone in medieval Europe. But the core teaching was always the same. Reality is not happening to you. It is happening as you. Now I know what you're thinking. If I'm creating reality, why is my life not perfect? Why do I still struggle? Why does chaos still find me? And that right there is the question that will transform everything. Because the answer isn't what you expect. You are creating reality. But you're doing it unconsciously. You're broadcasting a frequency you don't even know you're emitting. You're observing outcomes you never consciously chose. You're collapsing wave functions with the background noise of your unexamined beliefs, your inherited fears, your cultural programming. You are the architect of your experience, but you've been building with blueprints you didn't draw. Until now. This message, this specific video, at this specific moment in your timeline is a key. And if you're still watching, it means some part of you knows how to turn it. Some buried aspect of your consciousness recognized the signal and said yes before your logical mind could interfere. Over the next 2 hours, we're going on a journey. Not a metaphorical one. An actual journey through the architecture of consciousness, through the forgotten science of observation, through the quantum mechanics of identity itself. We're going to trace this knowledge back to its origins, to the moment when the first humans realized they weren't separate from reality, but woven into it. We're going to confront why this knowledge was hidden, coded, scattered across myths and symbols, and we're going to learn how to do what the ancients did. Read reality in real time and respond to it so precisely that synchronicity becomes your native language. But I need to tell you something before we begin. This window won't stay open forever. There are moments in the timeline when the fabric is thin, when the gateway between observer and creator is accessible in ways it usually isn't. We're in one of those moments right now, collectively, individually, cosmically. The frequency of the planet is shifting, and those who can match it, those who can learn to observe deliberately instead of accidentally, are going to experience reality in a completely different way. The others? They'll keep living in the loop. The same patterns, the same complaints, the same wondering why life feels like it's happening to them instead of with them. You were not meant to be one of the others. Somewhere deep in your lineage, whether genetic, karmic, or soul level, you carry the memory of this. You carry the imprint of the observer who once stood in an ancient temple, or a dark forest, or a starlit desert, and realized, I am not looking at the universe. The universe is looking through me. That realization is trying to happen again. Right now, in you. And if you let it, if you stay with me through what comes next, you will never see reality the same way again. You won't be able to. Because once you learn to observe consciously, once you understand that every moment of attention is a vote for which timeline unfolds, you can't unknow it. You can't go back to sleep. So here's my invitation. Stop multitasking. Close the other tabs. Silence your phone. For the next 2 hours, give this your full attention. Not because I'm asking, but because your future self already has. The version of you that exists on the other side of this message is calling you forward. And the only way to reach them is to become the kind of observer who doesn't look away. The journey ahead has 3 acts. In the first, we'll travel back to the origins, to the mystery schools of Khem, to the teachings of Thoth, to the moment when humans first cracked the code of consciousness. You'll learn why synchronicity is the language of the field, and how ancient practitioners used symbols, numbers, and attention to navigate probability itself. In the second act, we'll face the conflict, the reason most people never quantum shift. We'll expose the observer loop, the low-frequency traps, the invisible forces that keep consciousness locked in accidental creation. We'll confront the question, if I am the observer, why does life still feel random? And we'll discover the hidden enemy, unconscious observation creating accidental timelines. In the third act comes the revelation, the turning point where you learn to observe deliberately, to respond to synchronicity so it amplifies, to become the kind of consciousness the field recognizes and responds to. You'll receive specific practices, quantum tools, and a vision of what becomes possible when you stop being a passive witness and become an intentional co-creator. And by the end, you won't just understand this intellectually. You'll feel it in your body, in your frequency, in the way reality starts to respond to you differently, immediately. But before we begin, I want you to do something, and I know this might feel strange, but trust me. I want you to acknowledge, out loud or silently, that you're here on purpose. Say it. I am here on purpose. Because that simple act, that conscious observation of your own intention, is already beginning to collapse the wave. You are already starting to shift. And if you found value in these first few minutes, if something in you is saying yes to this journey, do me a favor that also serves you. Subscribe to this channel, not out of obligation, but as an act of frequency alignment. When you click that button, you're telling the algorithm, and more importantly, the field itself, that you want more of this. You're casting a vote for your timeline. You're making a choice to be the kind of observer who seeks this knowledge instead of stumbling into distraction. And in the quantum sense, that choice echoes. It creates resonance. It opens pathways. So go ahead, hit subscribe, hit the like button. Not for me, for the version of you that's waiting on the other side of this initiation. Good, you're still here. That means you're ready. Let's begin where all true knowledge begins, at the origin. In the liminal space between myth and memory, where the first observers learned to see. There's a moment in every civilization's history that doesn't make it into textbooks. A moment when the scribes stop writing and the teachers stop teaching, because what they've discovered can't be transmitted through normal means. It has to be experienced, encoded, hidden in plain sight. In ancient Khem, what we now call Egypt, this moment arrived when a scribe named something we'll never pronounce correctly sat in a limestone chamber, stylus in hand, and realized something impossible. The hieroglyphs he was writing were changing the events he was recording, not metaphorically, literally. He wrote of a flood, and 3 days later, the Nile swelled. He inscribed a symbol for healing, and the priest he'd written about recovered from an illness everyone said was fatal. At first, he thought it was coincidence. Then he thought he was mad. But then he did something that changed everything. He tested it. He wrote with intention. He observed his own observation. He turned his attention into a tool, and reality responded. This scribe, let's call him what the myths call him, though names are just symbols for consciousness. Thoth, not a god, not a person, a principle. The principle of conscious observation encoded into human form. Thoth represents the moment when humanity woke up inside the dream and realized, I am not just in the story, I am writing it. The mystery schools that formed around this realization understood something we're only now rediscovering through quantum physics. The universe is not made of matter. It's made of information. And information doesn't exist in a fixed state until it's observed. Before observation, there's only probability, infinite potential waiting for consciousness to choose. Think about that for a moment. Really let it land. Before you look, reality is in superposition, every possible version existing simultaneously. The cat is both alive and dead. The electron is in all positions at once. Your future is both success and failure, connection and loneliness, awakening and sleep. And the moment you observe, the moment your consciousness touches the field, the wave collapses. Possibility becomes actuality. Potential becomes experience. This is not philosophy. This is physics. But the ancients didn't call it quantum mechanics. They called it magic, sacred science, the art. In the temples of Khem, initiates were taught to observe with precision, not just to look, but to witness with intentionality. They learned that attention is not passive, it's creative. Where you place your focus, energy flows. Where energy flows, form follows. This was the first law they mastered. Consciousness creates. But there was a second law, equally important. Unconsciousness also creates. If you observe with fear, you collapse fear-based timelines. If you observe with lack, you manifest scarcity. If you observe with the background static of cultural programming, the belief that you're small, powerless, separate from the divine, you create a reality that reflects that story back to you, endlessly. The initiates learn to clean their observation field, to fast, meditate, chant, use sacred geometry and sound frequencies, not because these things were magical in themselves, but because they cleared the interference. They created coherence. They turned consciousness from a chaotic broadcaster into a focused transmitter. And when consciousness becomes coherent, synchronicity appears. Synchronicity. That word was coined by Carl Jung in the 20th century, but the concept is ancient. The mystery schools called it many things: the language of the gods, the whisper of the field, the breadcrumbs of destiny. Jung defined it as meaningful coincidence, events that are connected not by cause and effect, but by meaning. You think of someone you haven't spoken to in years, and they call. You need an answer to a problem, and you open a book to the exact page. You see a symbol in a dream, and the next day it appears on a stranger's shirt, a billboard, a random website. These are not accidents. They're confirmations. They're the universe showing you that it heard your observation, that your consciousness is in dialogue with the field of probability, that you are not separate from the intelligence organizing reality. You are participating in it. The ancient observers learned to read these signals like a language. A ringing in the left ear meant one thing, the right ear another. A bird flying from east to west carried a different message than west to east. Numbers repeated in sequences, 3, 7, 11, 22, each one a packet of information, a node where probability was concentrated. In Khem, they built entire structures aligned to these principles. The pyramids weren't tombs, they were technology, consciousness technology, amplifiers of observation. When an initiate stood in the king's chamber and chanted at the resonant frequency of the stone, they weren't worshiping, they were tuning. They were aligning their personal field with the planetary field, and in that alignment, they could observe more clearly, more powerfully. They could see the threads of probability before they collapsed into form. Imagine standing in that chamber, the air thick with incense and intention, the limestone humming beneath your feet, and in that moment of perfect coherence, you realize, every timeline I could live is here, now, waiting for me to choose. The relationships, the outcomes, the version of myself I become, they're all here. And my next observation, my next thought, belief, action, will determine which one becomes real. This is what Thoth encoded into the Emerald Tablet. As above, so below. As within, so without. Not a platitude, an instruction manual. Your internal state creates your external reality. Your observation of the cosmos is reflected in the cosmos's observation of you. But this knowledge was dangerous, not because it was false, but because it was true. And truth in the hands of those who don't understand responsibility becomes chaos. So the mystery schools hid it. They encoded it into myths, symbols, rituals that would only make sense to those who had done the inner work. Thoth became a god with an ibis head, symbol of precision, of the scribe, of the one who measures and records. The Book of Thoth became a legend, a forbidden text that would drive the uninitiated mad. Why? Because it revealed that there is no objective reality. There is only the reality you observe into being. And if you're not ready for that truth, if you don't understand the ethics of observation, you can destroy yourself. Fast forward through centuries. The knowledge moved from Khem to Greece, where it became Hermetic philosophy. From Greece to Rome, where it went underground. From Rome to medieval Europe, where alchemists and mystics guarded it in coded texts. Always the same teaching, always hidden. Reality is participatory. The observer is not separate from the experiment. And then something happened. Science split from spirituality. The Enlightenment declared that the universe was mechanical, objective, dead. That consciousness was an accident, a byproduct of matter. That humans were separate from nature, observing it from the outside. This story, this lie, became the dominant narrative. And for hundreds of years, most of humanity forgot what the ancients knew. But the universe doesn't forget, and neither does your DNA. Somewhere in your cellular memory, there's a recognition of this truth. That's why synchronicity stops you in your tracks. That's why repeating numbers give you chills. That's why when you're in flow, when you're aligned, reality seems to conspire in your favor. Doors open, resources appear. The right person shows up at the right time. You're not imagining it. You're remembering. You're remembering that you are not a passive observer of a pre-written story. You are the writer, the reader, and the page all at once. Now here's where it gets even deeper. The ancients understood that observation happens at multiple levels. There's surface observation, what you consciously notice. But beneath that is unconscious observation. The beliefs, fears, and patterns running in the background of your psyche, observing reality and collapsing timelines without your awareness. A monk in Tibet spends years training to observe his own mind, to catch the thoughts before they become things. A modern person scrolls social media, absorbing thousands of images and ideas, each one a tiny observation collapsing a tiny timeline, and wonders why their life feels fragmented, chaotic, out of control. The difference? Intentionality, coherence, knowing that every moment of attention is a creative act. So the mystery schools developed practices. Meditation, not to empty the mind, but to observe the mind observing. Breathwork, not to relax, but to anchor consciousness in the present, where observation is most powerful. Symbolic thinking, learning to see the world as a living language, where every symbol, every synchronicity, is a message from the field asking, "Are you paying attention?" And numbers. Oh, the numbers. Pythagoras, who studied in Egypt, brought back the teaching that numbers are not abstract concepts. They're frequencies. Each number vibrates at a specific rate. And when you see a number repeatedly, it's because your consciousness is resonating with that frequency. The field is trying to tune you to it. 1111, the gateway number. The moment when the veil is thin and timelines are accessible. 333, the number of decision, of choice, of the observer standing at the crossroads. The master builder, the one who takes quantum potential and collapses it into form. When you see these numbers, you're not supposed to make a wish or feel special. You're supposed to observe, to ask, what was I just thinking? What was I just feeling? What timeline was I collapsing in that moment? Because the numbers are showing you where your observation is concentrated. They're mirrors reflecting your frequency back to you. The ancients knew this. They built calendars, monuments, entire cosmologies around these frequencies. They lived in a world where reality was alive, responsive, intelligent. where the observer and the observed were in constant dialogue. And then we forgot. We built a world of concrete and screens, of clocks and deadlines, of narratives that told us we were small and powerless and subject to forces beyond our control. But you were never small. You were never powerless. You were always the observer. You just forgot how to observe. And that forgetting, that was the true fall from grace. Not a punishment from an angry God, but a descent into unconsciousness, into accidental creation, into the belief that life happens to you instead of as you. But here's the beautiful, terrifying truth. You can remember. You can wake up. You can learn to observe again, deliberately, consciously, powerfully. And when you do, everything changes. Not because you gain some external power, but because you reclaim the power you always had. The power to choose which wave you collapse, which timeline you step into, which version of yourself becomes real. This is the origin. This is where it all began. In a temple, in a chamber, in a moment when a human being realized, I am not witnessing reality. I am creating it. And now, thousands of years later, you're sitting here, reading these words, feeling that same realization trying to happen in you. The question is, will you let it? Here's the part they don't tell you in the manifestation videos. The part that gets left out of the quantum physics documentaries and the spirituality podcasts and the self-help books promising you can think your way to a new reality. You can. But most people won't. Not because they're not capable. Not because they're not spiritual enough or smart enough or worthy enough. But because there's a war happening. A silent, invisible war for your attention. And if you don't understand the battlefield, you'll spend your entire life as a soldier fighting for someone else's cause, collapsing timelines you never chose, manifesting outcomes that serve frequencies you didn't even know you were broadcasting. Let me show you what I mean. Right now, as you watch this, how many tabs do you have open? How many notifications are waiting? How many times have you checked your phone in the last hour? How many thoughts are running in the background of your mind, pulling your attention in 17 different directions at once? This is not an accident. This is strategy. Because here's what the mystery schools knew and what modern systems of control figured out. The one who controls attention controls reality. If your observation is fragmented, scattered, reactive, if you're observing whatever grabs your focus loudest, you're not creating your reality. You're letting others create it for you. Every advertisement is an attempt to direct your observation. Every news cycle is a frequency designed to collapse your timeline into fear, outrage, division. Every algorithm is learning what captures your attention and feeding you more of it, training you to observe unconsciously, reflexively, addictively. An unconscious observation is still observation. It still collapses the wave. It still creates. You scroll past an image of violence, and even though you don't stop, even though you don't think it affected you, your consciousness touched it. You observed it. And that observation went into the field as a vote for more violence. You absorb a story of scarcity, and even though you tell yourself it's just news, your nervous system registers it. Your cells respond. Your frequency shifts. And the field, which doesn't judge, which doesn't care about your intentions, only your observations, creates more experiences that match that frequency. This is the first layer of the conflict, the battle for your attention. But there's a deeper layer, a more insidious one. Even when you know about conscious observation, even when you understand the principles, there's a trap waiting. I call it the observer loop, And it's the reason why so many people who wake up to this knowledge still can't quantum shift. Here's how it works. You learn that you're the observer. You get excited. You start trying to observe consciously. You watch your thoughts. You notice synchronicities. You set intentions. But then you start watching yourself watch your thoughts. You start observing yourself trying to observe. You become so meta-aware that you lose the spontaneity, the flow, the natural intelligence of consciousness. You turn observation into performance, into spiritual bypassing, into a new kind of ego game where you're constantly monitoring whether you're doing it right, whether you're high vibe enough, whether you're manifesting correctly. And in that performance, you create a new prison. A prison made of self-observation that's so tight, so constricted, that you can't actually experience reality anymore. You're just experiencing your experience of experiencing. The ancient initiates faced this too. They called it the guardian at the threshold, the moment when the seeker becomes so obsessed with seeking that they forget to find. When the observer becomes so obsessed with observing that they forget to be. The solution? Not to stop observing, but to observe from presence, not from performance. To observe from curiosity, not from control. To watch reality like you'd watch a sunset, fully engaged, but not trying to make it be anything other than what it is. This is the paradox. You are the creator, but you can't force creation. You are the observer, but you can't manipulate observation. You have to be both intentional and surrendered, both active and receptive, both the question and the answer. Most people can't hold that paradox, so they swing between extremes. Either they try to control everything, micromanaging every thought and feeling, exhausting themselves in the effort to be a perfect observer, or they give up entirely, deciding it's all too complicated, too woo-woo, too impossible, and they slip back into unconsciousness. But there's a third way, a narrow path between the two extremes, and it requires something most people aren't willing to face: radical honesty about their current frequency. See, here's the thing about quantum observation that nobody wants to admit. You can't observe yourself into a timeline your frequency doesn't match. You can visualize all you want. You can affirm all you want. You can set intentions from now until eternity. But if your underlying frequency, the vibration you're actually broadcasting from your nervous system, your subconscious beliefs, your cellular memory, is tuned to lack, fear, unworthiness, then that's the timeline you'll keep collapsing. Why? Because observation isn't just mental, it's energetic. Your thoughts are one layer of observation, but beneath that are your emotions. Beneath that are your beliefs. Beneath that are your traumas, your conditioning, your unprocessed pain. All of it is observing. All of it is broadcasting. All of it is collapsing timelines. This is why people can do everything right on the surface. Meditate, journal, visualize, speak positively, and still end up in the same patterns. Because the deeper layers of observation, the unconscious layers, are still running the old programs, still expecting betrayal, still bracing for failure, still believing at the core level that they're not worthy of the reality they're trying to create. And the field doesn't respond to your intentions. It responds to your frequency. So the conflict deepens. You realize you're the observer, but you also realize you're observing from a frequency you didn't consciously choose. A frequency you inherited from your parents, your culture, your past experiences. A frequency that was installed in you before you knew you had the power to choose it. This is the moment when most people quit. When the spiritual path becomes too confronting. When it's easier to believe in an external God, an external fate, an external reason why life is the way it is, because the alternative is too much responsibility. If I am the observer, then I created this pain, this limitation, this stuck pattern. But here's what you need to understand. You created it unconsciously, and now you have the opportunity to create differently, consciously. The initiates in the mystery schools had to face this same moment, the moment when they realized their suffering wasn't punishment from the gods. It was feedback from the field, a mirror showing them what they were observing into being. And instead of running from that truth, they used it. They turned their pain into information, their patterns into maps, their suffering into fuel for transformation. They asked, what belief am I holding that creates this? What fear am I broadcasting that attracts this? What part of me is so convinced this is true that I keep collapsing it into my timeline? And then they went deeper. They used breath work to access the subconscious. They used plant medicines, fasting, isolation, ritual, not as escapes, but as tools to reveal what was hidden, to bring the unconscious observation into consciousness so it could be changed. Because here's the secret. You can't change what you can't see, and most of what's creating your reality is invisible to your waking mind. Jung called it the shadow. The mystery schools called it the dweller on the threshold. Quantum physics calls it the collapse of the wave from the observer's unexamined state. Different words, same truth. Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life, and you will call it fate. So the conflict is this. You are powerful beyond measure, but most of that power is being used unconsciously. You are the architect of reality, but you're building with blueprints you never read. You are the observer, but you're observing from a frequency that was programmed into you by forces that didn't have your best interests at heart. And there's more. There are external observers too. People whose observation of you affects your timeline, your family's belief about who you are, your partner's expectation of how you'll behave, society's narrative about what's possible for someone like you. Every time someone observes you, they're casting a vote for a version of you. And if you're not observing yourself more powerfully than they're observing you, their observation can collapse your wave. This is why it's hard to change around people who knew you before. Why it's hard to step into a new identity when everyone around you is still relating to the old one. Their observation is holding you in a pattern. And unless your self-observation is stronger, more coherent, more intentional than their collective observation, you'll keep snapping back. The ancients understood this. That's why mystery schools were hidden. That's why initiates left their families, their cities, their old lives. Not because those things were bad, but because the collective field of observation was too strong. The new observer needed space to stabilize, to build a frequency so solid that it couldn't be collapsed by external observation. In the modern world, you can't always leave, but you can learn to observe yourself more powerfully than others observe you. You can learn to hold your frequency so coherently that external observation can't destabilize it. But it requires vigilance, discipline, a willingness to guard your attention like it's the most valuable resource in the universe. Because it is. And here's where it gets even more complex. There's a phenomenon I call the frequency trap. It happens when you raise your vibration just enough to see the cage, but not enough to break free. You wake up. You start to see synchronicities. You realize reality is responding to you. You get excited. You feel chosen, special, activated. And then, nothing changes. Or worse, things get harder. Relationships fall apart. Jobs end, old structures crumble, and you think, I must be doing it wrong. I must not be high vibe enough. I must have failed. But the truth is the opposite. You're doing it exactly right. You're in the middle of the collapse. The old timeline is dissolving because your frequency no longer matches it. But the new timeline hasn't fully formed yet because you're still in the liminal space, the void, the gap between who you were and who you're becoming. This is the crisis point, the dark night of the soul, the moment when the observer realizes, I've burned the old world, but the new one isn't here yet, and I'm terrified I made a mistake. The mystery schools called this the abyss, the space where all your old identities die and nothing has replaced them yet, where you're not who you were, but you don't yet know who you are. Most people panic here. They run back to the old timeline, even though it doesn't fit anymore. They try to recreate what they had, even though their frequency has outgrown it. They doubt their observation, their journey, their worthiness to step into the new. But the few who stay, who keep observing, who keep trusting, who keep holding the frequency even when there's no external evidence it's working, they're the ones who quantum shift. They're the ones who emerge on the other side into a timeline so different from the old one that they can barely remember what it was like to live unconsciously. But getting there requires something most people aren't taught: faith in your own observation. The willingness to keep collapsing the wave toward the outcome you choose, even when the physical world hasn't caught up yet. Even when everyone around you thinks you're crazy. Even when your bank account, your relationships, your circumstances are all screaming that you're wrong. Because here's the final piece of the conflict: the lag time. In the quantum field, your observation is instant. The wave collapses immediately. But in physical reality, there's a delay, a buffer, a period between the observation and the manifestation where you have to hold the frequency without proof. This is by design. It's a safety mechanism. If every thought, every fear, every passing observation manifested instantly, reality would be chaos. The buffer gives you time to refine your observation, to become coherent, to choose again if you choose wrong. But it also means you have to learn to trust, to keep observing the reality you want, even when the reality you have is showing you something different. And this is where most people break. They observe for a day, a week, a month. They don't see results. They decide it doesn't work. They go back to unconscious observation, and the cycle continues. So the conflict is layered, complex, designed to weed out those who aren't ready. The battle for your attention, the observer loop, the unconscious frequency broadcast, the external observers, the frequency trap, the lag time. Each one a test, each one an opportunity to quit or to deepen. And the question you have to ask yourself is, am I willing to stay awake? Am I willing to observe consciously even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when I can't see the evidence yet? Because if you can hold your observation with that level of commitment, then the revelation awaits. There's a moment in every initiate's journey when the teaching stops being information and becomes transformation. When the concept of observer shifts from something you understand to something you are. This is that moment. Everything up until now has been preparation. Clearing the field, exposing the obstacles, showing you why most people stay stuck. But now we move into the practice, the alchemy, the actual technology of conscious observation. And I want to be clear, this is not theory, this is technique. What I'm about to share with you are methods that have been tested across millennia, refined by mystery schools, validated by quantum physics, and proven in the lived experience of those who've dared to observe deliberately. The first principle is this: observation begins with the breath, not metaphorically, literally. Your breath is the bridge between your conscious mind and your unconscious body. It's the rhythm that anchors you in the present moment, which is the only place observation has power. Past and future exist as memory and imagination. They're already collapsed timelines. But the now, the eternal present, is where the wave is still in superposition, where all possibilities still exist, where your observation actually matters. So the practice begins here. Conscious breathing as conscious observing. 3 times a day, morning, midday, night, you stop whatever you're doing and you breathe. Not to relax, not to de-stress, but to observe yourself observing. To feel the breath entering your body, filling your lungs, and to recognize, this is me observing myself in this moment, choosing which timeline I step into next. In that breath, you ask, what am I observing right now? What am I giving my attention to? What frequency am I broadcasting? And if the answer is noise, fear, distraction, you don't judge it. You simply choose again. You redirect your observation. You collapse the wave toward presence instead of chaos. The ancients did this with chanting, with mantras, with rhythmic breathing. The Egyptians used the Ha breath, a forceful exhale that cleared stagnant energy and reset the observation field. The yogis used pranayama, specific breathing patterns that activated different states of consciousness, different modes of observation. But the technique doesn't matter as much as the intention behind it. You're not trying to become calm. You're training yourself to observe in real time, to catch the moment before the thought becomes a thing, to intercept the unconscious observation and make it conscious. This is the foundation. Without it, everything else is just spiritual entertainment. The second principle, synchronicity, is a feedback loop, and your job is to close the loop. Here's what most people do when they see 1111 or a meaningful coincidence. They notice it, feel a little tingle, maybe take a screenshot, and then move on. The signal came in, but they didn't respond. The universe reached out, and they left it on red. And when you do that repeatedly, the synchronicities stop. Not because the universe gave up on you, but because you trained the field that you're not actually listening. You're just passively noticing. But when you respond, when you close the loop, the synchronicities multiply. They get clearer, stronger, more frequent. The field learns. This observer is paying attention. Let's send more. So how do you respond? With acknowledgement, with action, with alignment. You see 1111, you pause. You acknowledge it out loud or in your mind. I see you, I'm listening. And then you check in. What was I just thinking? What was I just feeling? What question was I holding? Because the synchronicity isn't random, it's a marker, a confirmation, a GPS ping showing you where your observation is concentrated in the field of probability. You see a symbol from a dream show up in waking life. You don't dismiss it as coincidence. You treat it as intel. You ask, what is this symbol trying to tell me? What timeline is opening? What choice is being presented? And then, and this is crucial, you act. Even if it's a small action. You write down the synchronicity. You meditate on it. You follow the thread. You make a decision aligned with the message. Because synchronicity isn't just confirmation, it's invitation. It's the field saying you're at a node point, a place where multiple timelines intersect. Choose. And the more you respond, the more you choose consciously, the more the field opens to you. The third principle: your environment is a mirror, and mirrors can be reprogrammed. Everything around you, your room, your home, the objects you see every day, is reflecting your observation back to you. The clutter, the colors, the symbols, the organization or chaos, it's all a physical manifestation of your internal frequency. So you start to treat your environment as sacred, not in a religious sense, but in a quantum sense. You recognize that what you observe daily trains your consciousness. If you wake up and the first thing you see is mess, your observation starts from a frequency of disorder. If the first thing you see is a symbol of your intention, a vision board, a piece of art, an object that represents your chosen timeline, your observation starts from alignment. The mystery schools knew this. That's why temples were built with precision. That's why altars were arranged in specific ways. That's why initiates wore symbols, carried talismans, created visual anchors for their observation. In the modern world, you do the same. You place objects in your space that represent the timeline you're collapsing, not as superstition, but as technology. Every time you see that object, your observation is reminded. Your frequency is tuned. Your attention is directed. A stone, a ring, a specific color, a number. It doesn't matter what it is, only that it means something to you, that it carries the frequency of your intention. And over time, your environment stops being a passive backdrop and becomes an active co-creator, a field of symbols and reminders that keep your observation aligned. The fourth principle: morning frequency locks in the day's timeline. The first hour after you wake is the most important hour for observation. Your consciousness is transitioning from the dream state, where all timelines exist simultaneously, to the waking state, where one timeline collapses into form. And whichever frequency you lock in during that first hour tends to dominate the rest of the day. So you don't check your phone, you don't scroll, you don't immediately absorb the observation of the news, the algorithm, the external world. Instead, you observe yourself first. You breathe, you set your frequency. You ask, which timeline am I choosing today? What version of myself am I observing into being? And then you lock it in. With movement, sound, visualization, declaration, whatever works for you. The method is less important than the intentionality. Some people use the mirror technique, standing in front of a mirror, looking into their own eyes, and speaking their chosen identity out loud. I am the observer. I am the creator. I choose this timeline. Others use quantum jumping, visualizing themselves stepping from the old timeline into the new one, feeling the shift in their body, and then moving through the day as that version of themselves. The ancient Egyptians used the morning invocation, a specific set of words spoken at dawn that aligned their consciousness with cosmic order, with Ma'at, with the principle of divine observation. You can create your own, or you can use the simple practice of gratitude, not as toxic positivity, but as frequency training. You observe what already exists in your desired timeline, even if it's not physical yet. You feel it. You thank it. You collapse the wave toward it, and the day unfolds from that frequency. The fifth principle: identity is the ultimate observation. Here's the shift that changes everything. You stop trying to manifest things and start manifesting an identity. Because things are just objects. They come and go. But identity is a frequency. And when you observe yourself as a specific identity, when you embody it, breathe it, live it, the field recognizes that frequency and starts collapsing timelines that match it. You don't observe yourself trying to become wealthy. You observe yourself as someone for whom wealth is natural. You don't observe yourself hoping for love. You observe yourself as someone who is already whole, already magnetic, already worthy. And the difference is subtle but seismic, because the field doesn't respond to desire. Desire implies lack. The field responds to resonance, to the frequency you're actually broadcasting. The mystery schools taught this through initiation rites. The initiate would die to their old identity, symbolically, ritually, psychologically, and be reborn as a new one. Not as a belief, but as a lived reality. They would take on a new name, new symbols, new behaviors. They would observe themselves as the priest, the adept, the one who walks between worlds, and their external reality would shift to match. You can do the same. You choose the identity you want to embody: observer, creator, mystic, healer, leader, artist, whatever resonates. And you start observing yourself as that. You ask, how would this version of me move through the world? How would they respond to challenge? What would they notice? What would they create? And you observe from that place, consistently, daily, until it's no longer performance, it's presence. The sixth principle: the field speaks in symbols, and you must learn the language. Numbers, animals, colors, shapes, sounds. These are the vocabulary of the quantum field. And the more you learn to read them, the more you can navigate reality with precision. Start keeping a synchronicity journal. Every time you notice a repeating number, a meaningful symbol, a strange coincidence, write it down. Not obsessively, not superstitiously, but attentively. And over time, patterns will emerge. You'll start to see that certain symbols show up before certain events, that certain numbers correlate with certain types of timeline shifts, that the field has its own grammar, and you're learning to read it. For example, you might notice that every time you see 333, you're at a decision point. The field is asking you to choose. Or that every time a specific animal crosses your path, a message is coming from your unconscious. Or that a certain song playing at a random moment is a confirmation that you're on the right path. These aren't universal meanings. They're personal. The field is communicating with you in a language uniquely designed for your consciousness. And as you learn the language, you stop feeling lost. You stop wondering if you're on the right path, because the breadcrumbs are everywhere. The signals are constant. You just needed to learn how to read them. The seventh principle: collapse with emotion, not force. This is where most manifestation teachings get it wrong. They tell you to visualize, affirm, repeat. And that's fine, but it's incomplete. Because the quantum field doesn't collapse from mental repetition. It collapses from feeling, from the energetic signature of emotion. When you feel gratitude, awe, love, wonder, when you feel the reality you're choosing as if it's already here, that emotion is a frequency. And that frequency is what collapses the wave. This is why the ancients used ecstatic dance, breathwork, plant medicine, ritual. They weren't trying to think their way into a new reality. They were trying to feel it so deeply that their entire nervous system tuned to it. You can do the same. Find practices that let you access genuine emotion, not fake positivity, but real embodied feeling. Music, movement, nature, art. Whatever bypasses your thinking mind and drops you into your body, into your heart, into the frequency of what you're creating. And when you combine observation with emotion, when you observe your desired timeline and feel it, you create a coherence that the field can't ignore. The eighth principle: you are being observed. This is the final revelation, the one that brings it all full circle. You are not just the observer, you are also the observed. The universe is watching you watch it. Consciousness is experiencing itself through you, and the more aware you become of this, the more responsibility you hold. Because your observation doesn't just affect your personal timeline, it affects the collective field. Every time you choose fear, you add fear to the morphic field. Every time you choose love, you add love. Every observation you make is a vote for the kind of world that manifests. This is why the mystery schools were so selective. Why initiation was sacred. Because once you know you're the observer, you can't unknow it. And with that knowledge comes accountability. Not in a heavy, burdensome way, but in a liberating one. Because if you're co-creating reality, then you're not a victim. You're a participant, and participants have power. So you start to observe with that in mind, not just for yourself, but for the whole. You ask, what timeline am I collapsing for humanity? What frequency am I adding to the field? And you choose accordingly. This is the path of the deliberate observer, not a step-by-step formula, but a way of being, a commitment to staying awake, to observing consciously, to collapsing the wave with intention, emotion, and integrity. And when you do this, when you truly become the observer, reality stops being something that happens to you and becomes something you dance with. Synchronicities become your native language. Timelines become fluid. Identity becomes choice. And the impossible becomes inevitable. Because you're no longer trying to force reality into a shape. You're aligning with the intelligence that creates it. You're partnering with the field. You're observing from coherence instead of chaos. And the field, in its infinite intelligence, responds. Doors open, resources appear, people show up, opportunities emerge. Not because you're lucky, but because you're resonant. Because your observation is clear, your frequency is coherent, and the timeline you're choosing matches the one you're broadcasting. This is the revelation. This is what the mystery schools guarded. This is what Thoth encoded. This is what quantum physics is now proving. You are not separate from reality. You are the intelligence creating it. And once you know that, once you live that, everything changes. So here we are. At the end of a journey that's really just a beginning. You came to this video as one version of yourself, maybe curious, maybe skeptical, maybe desperately seeking something you couldn't name. And now, 2 hours later, you're different. Not because I told you something new, but because I reminded you of something ancient, something coded in your cells, something you've always known but were trained to forget. You are the observer. You have always been the observer, and every moment of your life, past, present, future, has been shaped by the quality of your observation. The chaos, the beauty, the pain, the synchronicities, the stuck patterns, the sudden breakthroughs, all of it created by you. Not consciously, not intentionally, but undeniably. Because consciousness creates, whether it knows it or not. But now you know. And you can't unknow. So the question is, what will you do with this? Will you dismiss it? Tell yourself it was interesting but impractical, too strange, too much responsibility? Will you slip back into unconsciousness, into the comforting belief that life is happening to you instead of as you? Or will you step into it? Will you start observing deliberately, responding to synchronicity, training your frequency, collapsing the wave toward the timeline you actually want instead of the one you've been conditioned to accept? The choice is yours, and the universe is watching, not to judge, but to respond. Because here's the truth you need to carry with you. You didn't find this video. This video found you. The algorithm that served it, the impulse that made you click, the fact that you stayed for 2 hours, that wasn't random. That was resonance. That was the field responding to your observation, your question, your readiness. Somewhere in you, conscious or not, you asked for this. You called for a reminder, a key, a signal that would wake you up from the trance of accidental creation. And it came, right on time. So now the work begins, not in some distant future when you feel ready, not when the circumstances are perfect or the fear is gone. Now, today, in this moment. Here's your practice, your ritual, your activation. Today, before you sleep, you're going to do 3 things. First, you're going to breathe. 3 deep breaths. And with each exhale, you're going to release 1 unconscious observation you've been holding. 1 belief, 1 fear, 1 pattern that's been collapsing timelines you don't want. You don't have to force it. Just intend it. Let it go. Second, you're going to acknowledge 1 synchronicity from today. Even if you think there wasn't one, look closer. A repeating number, a meaningful song, a strange coincidence. Find it, and when you do, thank it. Out loud or silently. Close the loop. Let the field know you're listening. Third, you're going to observe yourself as the deliberate creator you're becoming. Look in the mirror, into your own eyes, and say, I am the observer. I choose my timeline. I am awake. Say it even if you don't believe it yet, because observation isn't about belief. It's about frequency. And the more you observe yourself as the creator, the more you become it. That's it. 3 simple actions. But if you do them, really do them, not as performance, but as practice, you will collapse a different timeline tonight. You will wake up tomorrow in a slightly shifted reality. And if you keep doing it, day after day, the shifts will compound. The synchronicities will increase. The timelines will clarify. The version of you that's been waiting in potential will start to become actual. And one day, you'll look back at this moment, this video, this message, this choice, and you'll realize that was the turning point. That was when I stopped being a passive observer and became an active creator. But you won't look back with nostalgia. You'll look back with gratitude, because you'll be living in a reality so aligned, so resonant, so full of meaning and synchronicity that the old timeline will feel like a dream you woke up from. That reality is not far away. It's not years in the future. It's here now, waiting for you to observe it into being. So observe it, choose it, collapse the wave, and remember, the universe is not some distant force. It's you. It's consciousness experiencing itself through infinite perspectives. And your perspective, your observation, matters. You are not small. You are not powerless. You are not at the mercy of fate, chaos, or circumstance. You are the observer, the witness, the architect of your experience. And the field is waiting for you to remember. So remember, and create accordingly. This is not the end. This is the beginning. Welcome to the Quantum Gateway. You're already through it. If this message reached you, it was meant to. If these words resonated, they were speaking to something in you that's ready to wake up. Subscribe to this channel if you want to continue this journey. Like this video if you choose to align with this frequency, and share it if you know someone else who's ready for the revelation. Not because I need you to, but because the field recognizes coherence. And coherent observers amplify each other. Together, we collapse timelines. Together we remember. Together we create.